The lie was on slide 14. I know that now. I didn't know it then, standing at the head of the conference table on the 7th floor of the Federal Financial Crimes Unit on a gray Tuesday morning in October, laser pointer in hand, 32 years of hard-won composure holding me together like stitching in an old coat. I was mid-sentence when my phone lit up on the table. I saw it from the corner of my eye, a London number. The kind with a Peckham dialing code I have known since I was 7 years old. The kind that used to mean, dinner is ready, come home. The kind that has meant for the last 4 years, something I am still learning to name. I did not break stride. The secondary account, I said, clicking to the next slide, was opened using a nominee director, a name that doesn't appear on Companies House, doesn't appear on any HMRC filing, and doesn't appear to exist anywhere in the public record. I moved the pointer to the branching diagram on the screen. 26 names, 41 transactions, 1 missing thread. Except here. The room leaned forward. Director Harlow, at the far end of the table, had her reading glasses pushed up into her gray hair and her arms crossed in the way she crosses them when she is listening properly. Not politely, but actually. My 2 co-investigators, Priya and Marcus, had stopped writing. The 3 compliance observers from the Financial Conduct Authority hadn't moved in 6 minutes. My phone screen went dark. The call had gone to voicemail. I kept going. The nominee traces back to a shelf company registered in the Isle of Man in 2019. That company has 1 director of record, no trading history, and a single bank account held at a private wealth management firm in Mayfair. Follow the wire transfers from that account, I clicked again, and you land here. A series of investor payouts distributed across 14 months to 23 individual clients who believed they were receiving returns on a legitimate private equity vehicle. How much? One of the FCA observers asked. Confirmed losses, I said, sit at 4.7 million. We believe the actual figure is closer to 7. Silence. The particular kind that happens when a number is large enough to stop being abstract. Director Harlow unfolded her arms. And the beneficial owner of the shelf company. I clicked to slide 14. I had built this presentation over 6 weeks. I had checked every figure, cross-referenced every document trail, reviewed every piece of supporting evidence twice over. Because that is how I work. Because that is the only way I know how to work. I was ready for this slide. I was ready for every slide. What I was not ready for was the name at the top of the ownership tree. I had told myself, the night before, sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of tea going cold beside my laptop, that it was probably a coincidence, a common name, a clerical proximity, the kind that happens in financial webs this tangled. But I have spent 12 years untangling financial webs, and I know what a coincidence looks like. It looks like nothing. It sits quietly in the background and explains itself without being asked. This did not sit quietly. This had a registered address in Peckham and a director of record whose date of birth matched to the day a woman I have known my entire life. I clicked to slide 14. Nwosu Group Holdings, I said. And I said nothing else. I let the room read the name. I let them read the address. I let Harlow's eyes move from the screen to my face and back to the screen, the way they always do when she is deciding what a thing means. I stood very still. My pointer hand did not shake. That is the thing about 12 years in this unit. You learn to keep the earthquake inside. Harlow said carefully, Adaeze. I know, I said. Is this? I know. I set the pointer down on the table. Quietly, the way you set something down you need other people to understand you are in control of. The FCA observers exchanged a look. Priya's pen had stopped moving entirely. Harlow held my gaze for a long moment. Then she said, finish the presentation. I picked up the pointer. I clicked to slide 15. I finished the presentation. My name is Adaeze Nwosu. I am 34 years old. I am a senior investigator, effective last month pending formal confirmation, at the Federal Financial Crimes Unit, based in London. I have a first-class degree from the London School of Economics, a master's from University College London, and a professional record that has not had a single formal complaint in 12 years of field work. I am also the second daughter of Chief Emeka and Dr. Adaeze Nwosu of Peckham, London, and I have spent most of my life learning to hold both of those facts in the same hand without letting one crush the other. Let me tell you about the Nwosu house. It was a Victorian terraced house on a road that had once been ordinary and had, by the time I was born, become aspirational. My parents had bought it in 1987 with the combined salary of a civil servant and a newly licensed nurse, and they kept it immaculate. Not just clean, curated. Every surface told a story about what kind of family lived there. The framed degrees on the hallway wall, the fine china that came out only for guests, the way my mother ironed my father's shirts with a precision that suggested she was ironing the family's reputation into the collar. We were a family of performances, not dishonest ones, just deliberate. Every room was a stage, and every Nwosu knew their part. Chioma had the lead. My sister is 3 years older than me, Chiamaka, but nobody calls her that except our grandmother on formal occasions. She is Chioma, and she always has been. Warm, fluid, socially irresistible in the way that certain people are, the ones who make every room feel like a party that was waiting specifically for them. She charmed my parents' friends, she charmed my teachers, she charmed every adult at every dinner party with a fluency I watched from the doorway and could not replicate, and for a very long time could not understand. I was not charming. I was thorough. I was the daughter who finished her homework before dinner, who read the footnotes of her textbooks, who asked questions in class that made teachers pause before answering. I was the daughter who, at 13, mapped the financial structure of a family savings scheme my uncle had been sold and told my father across the dinner table that the return rates were mathematically impossible and he should get his money out. He did not get his money out. He told me, gently but firmly, that I didn't understand how these things worked. 18 months later, the scheme collapsed. 14 families lost everything. My father never mentioned it again. Neither did I. I had already learned by then what my observations cost in that house. I had learned to keep them internal, to run the numbers quietly, to file my conclusions somewhere the family couldn't reach them. I was not a difficult child. I was a contained one. There is a difference, though the Nwosu household never quite found it. When I was accepted to LSE on a full scholarship, my parents attended the open day. I remember the date, a Saturday in April, the kind of London spring day that smells like rain it hasn't finished raining yet. Chioma had a work event in Canary Wharf, something to do with a client presentation she'd been preparing for weeks. My parents left the open day early to make it across the river in time. They didn't apologize. It didn't occur to them that it was something to apologize for. I walked around the LSE campus alone for the remaining 3 hours. I had a map and a printed schedule, and I attended every session I had marked. I ate a sandwich on a bench outside the library, and I told myself this was fine, that independence was a skill and I was developing it, that needing people to witness your life was a form of weakness I was well on my way to outgrowing. I had become very good at lying to myself by then. The trick was to use accurate language. Not my parents left, but I had the campus to myself. Not I spent the day alone, but I was very productive. I graduated top of my cohort 3 years later. My father shook my hand at the reception. My mother took a photograph. Chioma sent flowers, a beautiful arrangement, expensive, with a card that said I was proud of me. She did not come. She had a prior engagement. I put the flowers in water. I went back to my flat. I started studying for the postgraduate entrance exam. Two things have always been true of me, and they have always been in conversation with each other. The first is I feel everything. The second is I have trained myself to feel it quietly, completely, and alone, and then to get back to work. That training began in the Nwosu house. It was perfected 4 years ago in a conference room not unlike the one on the 7th floor. But I'll get to that. 4 years ago, I was the most qualified person in my unit for the position of senior investigator. I say that not with arrogance, but with the same precision I apply to everything. I had the case closure rate, the commendations, the peer reviews. I had 12 months of documented preparation for that role. I had, frankly, been doing most of the job already without the title. I did not get it. The panel told me, over a 15-minute meeting, that there had been a concern raised. They were careful with the language, concerns raised rather than allegation made. Something to do with the integrity of my credentials. Nothing specific, nothing they could share because it had been anonymously raised and they were bound by process. I sat across the table from 3 people I had worked with for years, and I looked at each of them in turn and I said, which credential specifically is in question? They didn't know. That was the shape of it. Someone had planted a seed without specifying the flower, and the panel had watered it anyway, just in case. I said, I would like the concern documented in writing and placed in my file. They said that wasn't standard procedure. I said, I'm aware, I'm requesting it anyway. They said they would see what they could do. The position was given to a colleague who had been with the unit for 18 months fewer than me and who has since left to work in private practice. I went home. Jerome was working late. He is always working late. Structural engineers are optimists who consistently underestimate the gap between a building's ambition and its reality, a quality I find equal parts exasperating and endearing. I sat alone at the kitchen table and I ate the dinner I had made for both of us, and I was methodical about it, and when I was done, I washed up and dried the dishes and put them away and sat back down and allowed myself, in the privacy of my own kitchen, 30 minutes of feeling exactly how angry I was. Then I made a cup of tea and started building the evidence file that would, eventually, prove the concern was baseless. The concern was formally dismissed 18 months later. I was given the position of acting senior investigator, pending a formal promotion review the following year. The person who had raised the anonymous tip was never identified, not by the panel, not by the internal review, not by me. Not until now. After the presentation, after the FCA observers filed out, and Priya and Marcus went back to their respective screens, and the coffee cups were collected by whoever collects coffee cups on the 7th floor, Director Harlow asked me to stay. She closed the conference room door. She did not sit down. Harlow is a woman who thinks better on her feet. I have worked under her for 6 years, and I have never once seen her make an important decision while seated. Walk me through it, she said. Nwosu Group Holdings was incorporated in 2017, small private equity vehicle, primarily manages investment portfolios for high net worth individuals in the Nigerian British community. Director of record is my sister, Chiamaka Nwosu, trading as Chioma Nwosu Adeyemi since her marriage in 2018. She divorced in 2021. The firm has approximately 40 active investor clients. Is your family invested? My parents hold a portfolio. I do not. Harlow nodded slowly. When did you know? I identified the name at 11:47 last night. I cross-referenced the director details at 12:32. I confirmed the familial connection at 12:59 and began the disclosure documentation at 1:15. I paused. I did not sleep after that. She looked at me for a moment, not with sympathy, which is one of the reasons I have always respected her, with something closer to assessment. "You could have flagged a conflict and stepped away from the whole thing," she said. "I could have. Why didn't you?" I thought about how to answer that, not because I didn't know, but because the true answer had several layers, and Harlow deserves the right one. Because 23 people lost money they trusted someone to protect, and because the evidence doesn't change depending on who built it, it's either true or it isn't. Harlow was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm assigning Marcus as oversight co-lead. Every material decision gets a second sign-off. You document everything, and I mean everything. Every call, every file request, every conversation you have that touches this case, including this one." "Understood." "One more thing," Harlow said. She moved to the window. 7 floors below, London was doing what London does in October, gray and purposeful, and completely indifferent to individual crisis. "Your sister, does she know this investigation exists?" "I don't know." And that was true. I didn't know. What I didn't tell Harlow was that my phone had rung 3 times that morning before the presentation, that the voicemail my mother had left was 47 seconds, that I had listened to it twice in the lift on the way up to the 7th floor. In the voicemail, my mother's voice was careful in the way it gets careful when she is frightened and trying not to show it. She said, "There is something going on with the family business." She said, "Your sister called last night and she sounded worried." She said, "I don't understand all of it, but there's some kind of government inquiry, and I thought perhaps you might know something about it, given where you work." Then she said at the very end, almost as an afterthought, "I hope you're well, Adaeze. You should call more." 47 seconds, 7 of them about me. I put my phone in my bag. I walked into the conference room. I delivered the presentation. And now, I stood in a glass-walled room on the 7th floor of the Federal Financial Crime Unit, holding the knowledge that my mother had just asked me, the investigator running the case, to make it go away. I did not tell Harlow this. Some things you need to carry alone, at least until you understand the shape of them. I picked up my file from the conference table. I straightened the pages. I walked to the door. "Adaeze," Harlow's voice stopped me at the threshold. I turned. "You built a clean case. Whatever happens next, that part is already done." I nodded. I walked out. The lift doors closed behind me. I pressed the button for the 4th floor. In the mirrored panel of the lift doors, a woman looked back at me, composed, straight-backed, her file held in both hands, her face giving nothing away. I looked at her for the 11 seconds it took to descend 3 floors. Then the doors opened, and I went back to work. It was 11:14 on a Wednesday night, and I was on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically. I had simply sat down there when I came in from work because the chair felt too formal for the size of what I was carrying, and the floor had seemed like the honest option. Jerome's cat, our cat now technically, though Ipa has always had opinions about whose space she prefers, was asleep on the mat by the boiler. The overhead light was off. The under-cabinet strip light was on, the one we'd meant to replace for 2 years because it flickers slightly when the heating comes on. The heating had just come on. I had the file open on the floor in front of me. Not the official file. That lived at the unit, locked, logged, co-signed. This was my working copy. The notes I kept in a small navy notebook that went everywhere with me. The kind with graph paper pages that I had been using since my master's degree, because lined paper feels like it's telling you where to go, and I preferred to decide that myself. In the notebook, across 3 pages of small, even handwriting, I had written down everything I knew. Here is what I knew. Nwosu Group Holdings had been receiving investor capital since 2017. The money had been pooled into what was presented to clients as a diversified private equity portfolio, legitimate-sounding vehicles with legitimate-sounding names, and, upon investigation, very little legitimacy beneath the surface. The underlying assets existed, technically, but they were overvalued by a margin that crossed from optimism into fraud somewhere around the second year of operation. Returns had been paid to early investors using the capital of later ones, the oldest trick in the book, performed with enough financial complexity that most clients wouldn't recognize it until it was too late. 23 families had lost money. Some had lost a great deal of it. The architecture of the fraud was intelligent. Whoever had designed it understood how to layer structures, how to use nominee directors and Isle of Man shelf companies to create distance between the beneficial owner and the visible paperwork. It was not amateur work. It was the work of someone who knew exactly what scrutiny looked like and had taken deliberate steps to stay one layer removed from it. I have seen this pattern many times. The sophistication of a fraud does not make the person behind it clever. It makes them afraid. Clever people don't build labyrinths. Frightened ones do. I turned to the 4th page of my notes. At the top, I had written 2 words and underlined them twice. The tip. 4 years ago, someone had contacted my unit's internal ethics line with an anonymous concern about the integrity of my professional credentials. The concern had been vague, no specific allegation, no supporting documentation, no identified complainant. It had been enough, in the hands of a cautious panel, to delay my promotion by 18 months. The ethics line logged the date and time of every contact. Those logs were accessible to senior investigators under specific review conditions. Conditions I had met as of yesterday afternoon, when I'd formally initiated the internal review of the original complaint, as part of the conflict of interest documentation I was building around the case. The tip had been called in on a Thursday afternoon at 3:47 p.m. I had cross-referenced that timestamp with the unit's visitor log, something I had done, in my more paranoid moments, years ago, and found nothing useful. But the visitor log wasn't the only record. There was also the building's external Wi-Fi access log. The unit's network picks up devices that connect to the public-facing hotspot in the lobby, a log kept for security purposes and stored for 5 years. On that Thursday afternoon at 3:51 p.m., 4 minutes after the call, a device had connected to the lobby Wi-Fi. The device was registered to a corporate account. The corporate account belonged to Nwosu Group Holdings. I sat on the kitchen floor and looked at that sentence in my notebook for a long time. The heating clicked. Ipa's tail moved once in her sleep. The strip light flickered. Here is what that sentence means. Someone from my sister's company was in the lobby of my building on the afternoon an anonymous tip was placed about me. They had connected to the Wi-Fi. They had left. That is circumstantial. I know it is circumstantial. I have spent 12 years understanding exactly what circumstantial means and exactly how much weight it can hold before it requires supporting evidence. But I am also a person who spent 12 years learning to trust the shape of things, and the shape of this was unmistakable. Chioma had been in my building. Chioma called in the tip. Chioma spent 4 years watching me absorb the damage, while she, from Peckham, from the family dinner table, from every Sunday phone call I no longer made, remained exactly where she had always been. The golden one, the reliable one, the only daughter who stayed. I closed the notebook. I sat on the floor for another few minutes in the flickering light. Then Jerome came in from the hallway, still in his coat, carrying a paper bag from the Thai place 2 streets over that does the noodle soup I like when I'm not sleeping. He took one look at the floor, took one look at me, and sat down beside me without saying a word. He put the bag between us. He handed me a pair of chopsticks. We ate on the floor. After a while, he said, "How bad?" I thought about how to answer. Jerome is an engineer. He respects structural honesty. I said, load-bearing. He nodded. He handed me the spring rolls. That is Jerome Okafa, a man who sits on floors and brings soup and knows the difference between questions that help and questions that are just noise. I have not always been grateful enough for that difference. Tonight, I was extremely grateful for it. The call from Auntie Ngozi came on a Thursday morning, which is significant only because I had been awake since 4 and had already run 6 kilometers and showered and made coffee and was sitting at my desk reviewing the Nwosu Group transaction records for the 3rd time when my phone rang. Ngozi is my father's younger sister. She is 62, and she has lived in Wolverhampton for 30 years, which she says has made her patient, and her husband says has made her stubborn, and both of them are right. She is the only member of my extended family who has ever treated my silence as something to be respected rather than corrected. She calls on birthdays. She sends cards for things other people forget, work anniversaries, exam results, the small victories that don't make it into family conversation because they don't photograph well. She called on a Thursday morning when I had not slept properly in 4 days, and her voice, when I answered, was doing something I had not heard it do before. It was being careful. Adaeze. She always says my name with all 4 syllables, the way my grandmother taught her. Am I disturbing you? No, what is it? A pause, the kind that means, I am deciding how much to say. I was at your parents' last weekend for your father's birthday. You knew about that. I did not know about that, but that was not the kind of information I allowed myself to account for anymore, so I said, go on. Chioma was there. She seemed distracted, nervous, if I'm honest. You know how she gets when she's carrying something. She talks too much and laughs in the wrong places. Ngozi paused again. On Sunday morning, before everyone was up, I came down to make tea and I could hear her on the phone in the back garden. She didn't see me. I stopped typing. She was talking about an inquiry, Ngozi said, very carefully. A government inquiry, she called it. She said something about, I didn't catch all of it, the window was between us, but she said something about, if Adaeze finds out, and she sounded frightened, Adaeze, properly frightened. The coffee cup was in my hand. I set it down. Ngozi, I said, and I made my voice very neutral, the voice I use in interviews when I need information, and I cannot afford to contaminate the source with my own reaction. Did she say anything else? Any names? Any specifics? Something about making sure things were documented correctly before anyone came looking, and then she saw me through the window, and she stopped. She came inside, and she was all smiles. You know how she is. And she said she was just dealing with a work headache. I didn't push. Another pause. I probably should have pushed. You did the right thing calling me, I said. Is there something I should know? I thought about that question for a long time in the span of about 2 seconds. Not yet, I said, but I need you to do something for me. If Chioma contacts you, or if you hear anything more, don't discuss it with anyone in the family, and don't tell her we spoke. Silence. Then quietly, Adaeze, is she in trouble? I looked at the transaction records on my screen. 41 lines, 7 million pounds, 23 families. I said, she's been in trouble for a while. She just didn't know I was coming. I ended the call. I sat for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and called Marcus. Here is the thing about a fraud investigation. It has its own gravity. Once it reaches a certain mass, it pulls everything toward it, whether or not those things were meant to be involved. Evidence surfaces that wasn't sought. Connections reveal themselves the investigator didn't know to look for. The truth has a way of becoming structural. It stops being a collection of facts and starts being the only possible architecture that holds the pieces together. What Ngozi's call told me was not simply that Chioma was frightened. I had already inferred that. What it told me was that Chioma knew the investigation existed, which meant someone had told her, which meant there was a source, inside the regulatory process or adjacent to it, who had given her enough information to start panicking, which meant she had been trying, for days at minimum, to get ahead of whatever was coming. I spent the next 3 hours with Marcus going through the case file contact log, every official communication, every party who had been formally notified that an inquiry was underway. It was a short list. It was a controlled list. And then Marcus, who has the instincts of a terrier and the patience of someone who genuinely enjoys spreadsheets, found it. 14 days ago, a courtesy notification had been sent to Nwosu Group's registered legal representative, standard procedure, the kind of letter that goes out to inform a firm's solicitor that their client may be subject to regulatory review. The letter was correctly addressed, it was correctly worded. It had been sent by someone in the administrative team who was following process and had no reason to believe the recipient would use the information to warn anyone. The firm's registered solicitor was a man named Patrick Adeyemi, Chioma's ex-husband. I sat back in my chair. Marcus looked at me across the desk. "Do you want me to document that?" "Document everything," I said. He nodded and went back to his screen. I looked at the wall for a moment, not at anything on the wall, at the wall itself, the particular blankness of it, the way it held the room together without requiring anything from anyone. Chioma knew for 2 weeks. She had been maneuvering for 2 weeks. She had spoken to her ex-husband, who still apparently represented her interests in some capacity, which was its own interesting detail, and she had been deciding what to move, what to document, what to bury. She did not know that the investigator she was trying to outpace was her own sister. Or perhaps she did. Perhaps that was exactly why she was frightened. My mother called again at 2:30. I was alone in my office. The door was closed. I looked at the phone for 2 full rings before I answered. "Adaeze." Her voice was tighter than the voicemail, tighter than it gets for most things. My mother does not do fragile easily. She is a woman who raised 2 daughters on a nurse's schedule and a civil servant's salary in a city that did not always make that easy. And she built herself a composure that is, in most circumstances, impressive. "Have you listened to my message?" "I did." "Then you understand why I'm calling." "I understand what you've told me, yes." A brief silence. My mother recognizes careful language. She spent 30 years in clinical settings. She knows when someone is choosing their words with precision. "Adaeze, your sister is very worried. The whole family is worried. This inquiry, or whatever it is, we don't understand it. Your father has been on the phone to his solicitor since yesterday, and nobody is telling us anything clear." "Mom, I know you work in that area, financial things. I know you understand how these processes work better than we do." She paused. "I'm asking if there's anything you can do to help clarify things, to make this go away more quickly." Make it go away. I sat very still in my chair. There are moments in a life that are so precisely, so brutally ironic that the only reasonable response is to admire the architecture of them, even while they are dismantling something in you. My mother, who has called me perhaps 11 times in the last 4 years, who did not attend Jerome's and my engagement dinner because she said she hadn't been feeling well, and who felt well enough, Ngozi told me later, to attend Chioma's work function the following weekend, was calling me now. Calling me because she needed something. Calling me because she had a problem that required the specific skills of the daughter she had never quite known how to see. She was asking me, the investigator running the case, to make it go away. "Mom," I said. My voice was even. I had spent 12 years making my voice even in rooms far more hostile than this one. "I can't speak to an active regulatory matter. That's not something I'm able to do." "I'm not asking you to do anything improper," she said, and I could hear the shift, the slight tightening, the familiar register of a woman who feels she is being misunderstood and does not have the vocabulary to say so. "I'm asking you to help your family." "I know what you're asking." "Then why won't you?" "Because I can't." 3 words, as clean as I could make them. "I'm sorry, Mom. I genuinely am." A silence. long enough that I could hear the house in the background, the particular ambient sound of the Peckham house, the faint tick of the clock in the hallway, a sound I have known my entire life and have not heard in over a year. Then my mother said, in a voice that had gone quiet and a little distant, "You've always cared more about that job than this family, from the very beginning." She ended the call. I looked at my phone. 22 seconds. I counted them, not deliberately, just the way you count things when you're keeping yourself from feeling them too directly. I looked at my phone for 22 seconds. Then I put it face down on my desk and opened the transaction records. 41 lines, £7 million, 23 families, most of them people like mine, people who had trusted someone with a familiar name and a confident manner and a beautifully designed investment brochure. People who had worked for decades and saved carefully and handed it over in good faith. I thought, I am protecting her. That is what she cannot see, and may never see, and cannot be told. I am the person standing between her savings and a far worse outcome than she is currently afraid of. I am doing the most loving thing available to me, and from where she is standing, it looks exactly like indifference. I have lived my entire life on that side of the glass, the side where doing the right thing, carefully, completely, looks from a distance like simply not caring enough. I picked up the file. I went back to work. I told Jerome at 10:15 that night. Not all at once. That's not how we work. Jerome and I have spent 4 years building a language for the things that are difficult to say, and the grammar of that language involves time. Long pauses that are not awkward, silences that hold rather than avoid, the patient understanding that some truths need a runway before they can be spoken at full speed. He was in the kitchen when I came home. He had made tea, the Kenyan blend his mother sends from Nairobi every few months, the one that smells like a room you want to spend time in. He poured a mug without being asked and set it on the table across from his own. I sat down. I looked at the mug. I said, "It was Chioma." He didn't respond immediately. He lifted his own mug, drank, set it down. Processing. That is Jerome. He does not perform reaction. He has one, and he takes it seriously. Then he speaks. "The fraud case," he said. "Yes. And the tip 4 years ago, the one that held back my promotion." He was quiet for a moment. "Both," he said. Not a question. "Both." Another pause. The boilers shifted. Ipa appeared from wherever she had been, assessed the room, and jumped up on Jerome's chair arm with the air of someone who has arrived specifically to supervise. "How certain?" he said. "Evidentially certain. On the tip, circumstantially certain. Different standards. Both feel the same to me right now." He nodded. He did not say, "Are you sure?" He did not say, "There must be some mistake." He did not do what so many people do, which is to take the discomfort of a difficult truth and transform it through a series of well-meaning questions into doubt. He believed me, completely, immediately, without caveat. I have never told him how much that costs and how much it gives back. "What do you need?" he said. I thought about it. "I don't know yet. Tonight I just needed to say it out loud." He reached across the table, put his hand over mine, held it. We sat there for a while. The tea went slightly cold. The strip light over the counter flickered twice. Outside, London was doing what it always does, moving, regardless. I thought about the 23 families. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone, tight with fear she did not understand the full dimensions of. I thought about Chioma in my parents' garden, talking into her phone, trying to stay one step ahead of something she didn't know had already arrived. I thought about the girl I had been in the Nwosu house, thorough, contained, running the numbers alone in her room, filing her conclusions somewhere the family couldn't reach. That girl had spent a long time believing that one day the numbers would speak loud enough that everyone in the room would have to hear them. I think she was right. I just don't think she knew back then how much it would cost to be the one to make them speak. Tomorrow, I would go back to the 7th floor. I would review the transaction records. I would file the next round of disclosure documentation. I would do it methodically, completely, without error, because that is the only way I know how to do anything. The case would move forward. The truth would do what truth does when it is properly evidenced and correctly filed. It would become inescapable. But tonight, I sat at my kitchen table with Jerome's hand over mine and the tea going cold between us, and I let myself feel the full weight of what I was carrying. Both things, the case and the wound. For a very long time, I had believed they were separate, the life I had built and the life I had been given, the investigator I had become, and the daughter who never quite arrived. I see now that they were always the same case. I had just been building toward the moment I could prove it. I did not sleep well that Thursday night. Not because of anxiety. I have learned over 12 years of this work to separate the weight of a case from the hours my body needs to function inside it. Anxiety is noise. Evidence is signal. I know which one to follow when I am lying in the dark at 2 a.m. with Jerome breathing steadily beside me and the case turning slowly in my mind like a key looking for the right lock. What kept me awake was something quieter than anxiety, something that had no name yet, which is always the most honest sign that it matters. I lay there and I thought about the girl at the Nwosu dinner table, 13 years old, paper in front of her, explaining compound interest to a father who would not listen. I thought about the woman in the LSE library eating a sandwich alone on an April afternoon and telling herself she was being productive. I thought about the 4 years between the anonymous tip and tonight. 4 years of carrying a wound I couldn't identify because I couldn't see the hand that had made it. And underneath all of that, beneath the case and the history and the shape of what Chioma had done, something else was sitting. Something I had been placing carefully in a locked drawer for a long time and could feel, tonight, rattling against the wood. I still wanted my parents to see me. Not the investigator, not the credential, not the promotion or the case closure rate or the professional record without a single formal complaint. Me, Adaeze, the second daughter who read the footnotes, who mapped the saving scheme at 13, who ate the sandwich alone and told herself it was fine. I wanted that. After everything, I still wanted it. I did not say this to Jerome. I said it to the ceiling, in the dark, in the private language of a woman who has spent a lifetime being articulate about everything except the thing that hurts most. The ceiling, for what it's worth, held the confession without judgment. At 4 a.m., I got up, I made tea, I sat at the kitchen table with Epa in my lap, and I looked at the photo on the kitchen shelf, the one from Jerome's in my civil ceremony 2 years ago, the small one with 14 guests in a registrar's office in Southwark, afternoon light coming through old windows, Jerome's father's hand on my shoulder, because Jerome's father is the kind of man who touches your shoulder at the right moment without making it a performance. My parents were not in that photograph. They had been invited. The invitation had been declined, politely, through my mother, who had said they would not be comfortable given the current distance between us. She had said current as though distance were a weather condition rather than a choice, as though it would change on its own if everyone just waited long enough. I looked at the photograph for a while. Then I drank my tea, put Epa off my lap with the gentle firmness she has never once accepted gracefully, and went to get ready for work. The formal charges were filed on Friday morning. I was not in the room when they were served. That was Marcus's job, and Marcus did it with the meticulous, unhurried efficiency that makes him the best co-lead I have ever worked with. Nwosu Group Holdings received the documentation at 11:43 a.m. The company's registered solicitor, who was no longer Patrick Adeyemi, Chioma having quietly replaced him some time in the previous 10 days, which was itself a documented detail, which was itself useful, signed the receipt at 11:51 a.m. At 12:07, my phone rang. I looked at it. Not the Peckham number this time. Chioma's mobile. A number I had not heard from in 4 years. Not since a birthday text so carefully worded it could have been sent by a stranger who had Googled the appropriate thing to say to a sibling you have comprehensively betrayed. I let it ring. At 12:14, she rang again. At 12:22, she rang a third time. At 12:25, a text arrived. 6 words. I need to talk to you. I read it. I put my phone in my desk drawer. I went to get lunch, a sandwich from the place on the ground floor that does good coffee and unremarkable food, the kind of place you go not because the food is good, but because it requires no decisions. I sat at a corner table and I ate the sandwich, and I looked at the people moving through the lobby, and I thought about what Jerome had said to me the previous night, sitting on the kitchen floor with noodle soup between us. He had said at one point, very quietly, "You know she's going to come to you." I had said, "I know. What will you do?" I had thought about it honestly, which is the only way I know how to think about anything. I said, "I'll open the door, but I'm the one who decides how wide." Jerome had nodded. He had reached over and taken a spring roll. He said, "That's the right answer." "How do you know?" He looked at me across the paper bag. He said, "Because it's yours, not theirs, not hers, yours." I finished the sandwich. I went back upstairs. I took my phone out of the drawer. I texted Chioma one line. "My flat, Saturday, 2 p.m. You have 1 hour." Her reply came in 11 seconds. "I'll be there." She arrived at 1:58. I know because I was watching the street from the upstairs window, not anxiously, just observantly, the way I watch most things. She came on foot, which surprised me. Chioma has always had a relationship with her car that suggests she finds walking insufficiently impressive. She was in a dark coat, no bag, hands in her pockets. She walked more slowly than I remembered. She stopped outside the building for a moment, looked up at the windows, then looked back down at the pavement. Whatever she was deciding, she decided it. She came in. Jerome was at a friend's. I had asked him to be, not because I needed to be protected from my sister, but because some rooms can only hold so much truth at once, and this one needed to hold as much as possible. I opened the door before she knocked. She looked at me, I looked at her. She was thinner. There were shadows under her eyes that had the specific quality of sleeplessness earned rather than circumstantial, the kind that take weeks to build. Her hair was pulled back in a way that suggested she had made an effort and then changed her mind halfway through. The confidence she has worn my entire life, that warm, fluid, take up all the oxygen confidence that every room seemed to welcome without question, was gone. Or not gone, underneath something heavy enough to hold it down. "Come in," I said. She came in. She looked at the flat the way my parents had never looked at the flat because they had never been in it, taking in the shelves of books, Jerome's architectural drawings pinned on the board in the hallway, Eppa regarding her from the top of the bookshelf with the withering assessment Kat's reserve for the unannounced. I did not offer tea. I sat in the chair by the window. She sat on the sofa, on the edge of it, and she wrapped her hands around each other in her lap, and she looked at the floor. I let her sit with it. I have learned in 12 years of interviews that the silence before someone speaks the truth is sacred. You do not fill it. You do not hurry it. You wait. When she looked up, her eyes were wet, not overflowing, holding. "I don't have a prepared speech," she said. Her voice was rougher than usual. "I had one. I threw it away this morning. It sounded like something I'd written for someone else." "Good," I said. She took a breath. "I knew you were going to surpass me. I knew it when you were 16 and I was 19, and you were explaining derivatives to Dad's accountant at a dinner party, and the accountant was taking notes." A pause. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself we were different kinds of people, and different kinds of people have different kinds of success, and there was room for both of us. She stopped. I lied to myself for about 3 years, and then there wasn't room anymore, not in my head. And I made choices. The room was very quiet. "The tip," I said. She nodded, once, small. "The tip. You came to my building." "Yes." "You called the ethics line from outside." "From the car park, yes." She looked at me steadily. "I want you to know I told myself at the time that I was just leveling something, that you had advantages I didn't, and I was just..." She stopped. "I know how that sounds." "It sounds like someone who was frightened and made a catastrophic choice and then had to keep making it," I said. She looked at me. Something in her expression shifted, the faintest surprise, which told me she came here prepared for something harder than honesty. "Is that what you think?" she asked. "That's what the evidence suggests," I said. "And the firm, the fraud, I need to understand that from you. Not for the case. The case doesn't need your understanding. I need it." She exhaled, long and slow, the kind of exhale that has been waiting for a very long time. "The firm started legitimately, or it started with the intention of legitimacy. The first year, everything was above board, and then the returns weren't what I'd projected, and the clients were expecting what I'd promised, and I made one adjustment to buy time, and then another, and then..." She stopped. "You know how it goes." "I know exactly how it goes. I've spent 12 years watching people build labyrinths when one honest conversation would have cost them almost nothing." She flinched, not from cruelty, from accuracy. There is a difference, and she felt it. "The investors," she said. I know what I cost them. I haven't stopped knowing since Marcus's team walked into my office. Knowing isn't enough. Cooperation is enough. Full cooperation, documented, consistent, not performed. Do you understand the difference?" "Yes." "Then that starts Monday. Everything, every account, every record, every communication. You hold nothing back." "I know." "And there's something else." I looked at her directly across the quiet room. "Every member of this family who spent 4 years believing a version of me that you constructed, every aunt, every uncle, every cousin who thought I had disappeared or fallen apart or abandoned the people I came from, they get the truth from you, in writing, not a phone call, not a conversation that can be misremembered, a written account sent to everyone with Ngozi to confirm receipt." Chioma looked at the floor. A long moment. "All right," she said. "I'm not finished." She looked up. "You will not contact our parents before I do. What happens between me and them happens on my terms, in my time. You don't get to manage that narrative. You don't get to soften the landing or position yourself in their version of events before I've had the chance to exist in it honestly. Do you understand me?" "Yes," she said, quietly, without argument. I sat back in my chair. "I'm not cutting you out. I want to be clear about that. Not because you've earned the alternative, but because I've spent 4 years watching what it costs to be cut out of something, and I won't do it to anyone, even you. But what we are, what we might become, gets built from the ground up, slowly, on honesty. And the first brick is Monday morning, and everything you hand over without being asked for it twice." She nodded. Her eyes were still holding. Then she said very quietly, "I'm sorry, Adaeze. I know that's not a currency that spends very far, but I am." I looked at her, my older sister, the woman who had the lead role in every room I grew up in, who had charmed and performed, and when the performance wasn't enough, had quietly, precisely dismantled. That woman sitting now on the edge of my sofa, with her hands wrapped around each other and her prepared speech thrown in a bin somewhere, and nothing left between us but the thing that was true. "Show me," I said. "That's all. Just show me." She left at 3:14. I stood at the window and watched her walk back the street. She walked more slowly going than coming, which I understood. She had arrived carrying something she'd been holding for 4 years. She was leaving, having put it down. Things are always heavier on the floor than they are in your arms. Jerome came home at 4. He looked at my face. "How did it go?" he said. "Like the first day of something," I said. He put the kettle on. I called my parents on a Sunday. Not because Sunday was symbolic, though it was. Sunday had always been the Nwosu family day, the day the house smelled like my mother's cooking and my father's newspaper, and the particular combination of effort and ritual that is the closest thing to love some families know how to express. I called on Sunday because I had waited long enough, and because some doors, once you decide to open them, should be opened before you lose the nerve. My mother answered on the second ring. Adaeze. Her voice, the sound of it, just my name in her mouth, the 4 syllables she gave me, did something to my chest that I was not prepared for and did not try to manage. "Mum," I said, "I need you and Dad to listen to me. Both of you. Can you put me on speaker?" A pause, the sound of movement, her voice away from the phone calling my father's name, the particular ambient sound of the Peckham house, the hallway clock. Then my father's voice, close now, cautious. "Adaeze." "Dad." Silence. The 3 of us in it together, which was itself something. We had not been in anything together for 4 years. "I'm not calling to have an argument," I said. "I'm not calling to assign blame or to make you feel a specific way about what's happened. I'm calling because Chioma is going to send you something this week, and I want you to read it. All of it. And I want you to read it knowing that whatever you feel when you're done, shame, grief, anger, whatever it is, I'm not using it as a weapon. I'm not collecting debts. I'm calling because I am still your daughter, and I think you have forgotten what that means, and I would like, if you are willing, to remind you." Nothing. The clock in the hallway, my father's breathing. Then my mother said, "Adaeze, baby." Her voice had something in it I had not heard in so long, I had almost stopped believing it existed. The specific frequency of a mother who is feeling the full dimensions of her failure and is too overwhelmed to be articulate about it. "We have missed you. I have missed you so much. She stopped. "Every day." My father said nothing, but he stayed on the line. For a man who has expressed love almost exclusively through expectation and has said "I'm sorry" perhaps 3 times in his recorded life, staying on the line was its own language. "I know," I said, and I meant it, not as forgiveness, not yet, not completely, but as acknowledgement. "I know you missed me. I know missing someone and choosing them are not the same thing, but I know you felt the absence. I know." "What do you need from us?" my father said. Gravel and rust, the voice of a man who has run out of decrees. I thought about that question. I had thought about it for 4 years in every form it could take, and I had given it many answers, in the shower, in the car, in the dark before sleep. But sitting here now, with Jerome at the kitchen table pretending to read his engineering journal, and Epa installed on the windowsill like a furry supervising committee, the answer that came was not the one I had rehearsed. "Come for dinner, next Sunday. Just dinner. Jerome cooks. Bring nothing except yourselves and the willingness to be in a room where I exist as a full person and not as a problem that was resolved." A long pause. "We'll be there," my mother said. My father said, "What time?" And something in me, not everything, not the whole locked drawer, but something came loose. "At 1 o'clock, I said. "Don't be late." They were not late. They arrived at 12:53, which for my father is the equivalent of being 20 minutes early, since Chief Emeka Nwosu has spent 68 years treating punctuality as a moral position. My mother had a tin with her, shortbread, the kind she used to make for every school event, every Christmas, every occasion in the Nwosu house that required sweetness as currency. She had never once made them for me specifically. She had made them for me specifically. I opened the door. My mother looked at me the way she must have looked at me the first time, which is to say, like someone encountering something they made and cannot quite believe they made it. "Come in," I said. Jerome appeared from the kitchen. He extended his hand to my father with the ease of a man who has thought carefully about this moment and decided that warmth without performance is the right register. My father shook it. He held it a beat longer than necessary, which was the closest he would come, today, to an apology. My mother put the shortbread tin on the counter and looked around my kitchen, the shelves, the blueprints, Eppa's bowl by the boiler, the photograph from the civil ceremony on the shelf, and she stood there for a moment with her hands pressed together in front of her, and I could see her understanding the years she was looking at, the whole life, the built thing, the rooms and the choices, and the person who had constructed it without them. "It's a beautiful home," she said. Her voice was careful and honest in equal measure. "Thank you," I said. "We like it." Jerome put Jerome to work immediately, setting the table, a job that required counting plates and finding glasses and navigating a kitchen he didn't know, which gave my father something to do with his hands and his need to be useful, which I suspect Jerome understood and deployed deliberately. My father moved through the kitchen slowly, carefully, opening the cabinet I pointed to, counting out 4 plates with a concentration that suggested he understood the weight of the number. 4, not 2, 4. My mother stood beside me at the counter while I made tea, and she put her hand on my arm, and she said nothing. There was nothing adequate to say, and she knew it, and I knew it, and the silence between us was not comfortable. It was honest, which is better. Honest silences can be built on. Comfortable ones sometimes can't. After a while, she said, "I read Chioma's letter." "I know." "I read every email you sent us." Ngozi had them. She stopped. "That letter you sent the night before your residency?" She stopped again. "You don't have to," I said. "I want to." Her hand tightened on my arm slightly. "That letter, I have read it 14 times since Ngozi showed it to me. I don't have the words for what it cost you to write that and not receive an answer." I looked at the kettle. The water was coming to boil. It cost a lot, and then I stopped counting the cost and started building instead. That's all I know how to do. She was quiet. Then, she did well, the builder. The kettle boiled. I poured the tea. Lunch was imperfect. That is the most accurate word and also the most important one. My father asked Jerome questions about structural engineering with the formality of a man conducting a job interview, which was his way of expressing interest, and I have learned, over a lifetime, to translate his formality into his actual meaning. My mother kept touching things, the edge of the table, the shortbread tin, my hand when I passed her something, like she was checking that the room was real. Jerome told a story about a bridge calculation that had gone comprehensively wrong in a way that was only funny in retrospect, and my father laughed at the right moment, genuinely, and looked briefly startled by his own laughter. There were silences. Some of them were difficult. None of them were dishonest. At one point, my father put down his fork and looked at me across the table and said, "I owe you years, Adaeze." I held his gaze. "You can't give me years back, Dad." "No," he said, "I know that. But you can show up to the ones that are left." I kept my voice even, not cold, even. There is a difference, and it matters enormously. That's all I'm asking. Show up, consistently, without drama, without making it about making it right, because making it right is not possible. Just show up. He looked at me for a long moment. My father, who has never been without a decree, who has run every room he has ever stood in, who told his younger sister to stay out of it, who sent back the letter, who said enough in the voice that closed conversations before they could be truth. He said, "I will." 2 words. not performed, not qualified. I believed him enough to try. That is what I had available, and it was more than I had yesterday, and that is how things are built. Not in revelations, but in increments. Not in speeches, but in showed-up Sundays. After lunch, my father stood at the kitchen window with his coffee, looking at the small garden Jerome and I had been slowly making habitable. He stood with his hands around the mug, and he looked at the garden for a long time without speaking, and I understood what he was seeing. Not the garden, the time. All the time that had passed outside this window while he was in Peckham being certain, and the particular grief of a man who has run out of reasons to stay certain. Before they left, my mother held me at the door. A real hold, not a public-facing affection, but the kind of holding that means, I know what I almost lost. I know I haven't earned this back. I am holding you anyway because you are my daughter, and I am only now understanding what that should have always meant. I let her hold me. I did not say it was all right, because it was not all right. It was a beginning. Those are not the same thing, and I was done, finally and completely pretending that they were. My father paused at the front step. He turned back once. "Same time next week?" he said. I looked at him, 68 years old, coat on, coffee mug still in his hand because he'd forgotten to put it down, looking at me across the threshold of the life I built without him. "Same time," I said. "Don't be late." He nodded. He turned. He walked down the path. Jerome appeared at my shoulder. We stood in the doorway and watched them reach the gate, watched my mother take my father's arm, watched them turn onto the street and become two people walking through a Sunday afternoon in Brixton, ordinary and devastated and trying. "Well," Jerome said. "Yeah," I said. We stood there a moment longer. Then he went back to the kitchen and I closed the door, and I stood in my hallway in the quiet of it, the house that was mine, the life that was mine, the door I opened on my own terms, and I breathed. 3 months later, Chiyomo's cooperation helped recover £4.2 million for the investor families. The remaining gap is subject to ongoing civil proceedings. The case closed, officially, formally, with my name on the documentation and Marcus's signature beside mine and Director Harlow's stamp at the top. Harlow called me into her office when the final papers were filed. She sat across from me, which was unusual for a woman who thinks better standing, and she said, "I've submitted your confirmation as senior director. The committee has approved it." I said, "Thank you." She said, "Don't thank me. You built the case. You disclosed the conflict. You did it correctly, entirely, every step." She leaned forward slightly. "You know what that is? That's character. Not the kind people perform, the kind they actually have." I drove home with the windows down, which I almost never do in November, because November in London does not invite open windows. But I needed the air. I needed to feel the cold and the speed and the particular sensation of moving through the city with something finished and something beginning in the same breath. I parked outside the flat. I sat in the car for a moment. I thought about the girl at the kitchen table in Peckham, 13 years old, explaining compound interest to a man who wouldn't listen. I thought about how long she'd been waiting for the numbers to speak loud enough to fill a room. I thought about everything it had cost to become the woman who could make them speak. The sandwich on the bench, the returned letters, the 18 months of sideways progress, the 4 years of carrying a wound without knowing its origin. I thought about the case file on my desk upstairs. Clean, complete, every line documented. And I thought, she would be all right, that 13-year-old. If she could see this, the house, the case, the door she controls, the Sunday lunches that are imperfect and real and hers, she would be all right. I got out of the car. I went inside. Jerome had left a note on the kitchen table. "Dinner at 7, don't work until 8. Love." I put the note in the drawer where I keep things that matter. Then I sat down at the table, in the quiet of a Monday evening, in a home I built with my own hands, and I let myself be still. The numbers had spoken. The truth had surfaced the way it always does when it is correctly evidenced and given enough time. And I, the second daughter, the contained one, the one who finished her homework early and ate the sandwich alone and filed her conclusions somewhere the family couldn't reach, I was still here. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. Hey guys, I want to hear from you. Not a generic response, your personal take. Was there a moment in this story that hit differently for you? Maybe a line, a scene, a silence that landed somewhere personal? Tell me in the comments. Honestly, I read every one. And if this story earned it, if Adaeze's quiet, methodical, undefeatable kind of survival meant something to you, give it a like. Not as a reflex, only if it was worth it. Because she was worth it, and so are you. Thank you for watching. Ensure you are subscribed. See you in our next story.